I was standing in the observation bay of Relay Station Mirova when the signal came through. Not a distress call, not a beacon ping, not one of those automated check-ins that council vessels send every 6 hours like clockwork, precise and boring, and reassuring in their own bureaucratic way. No, this was something else. It started as a vibration in the deck plates. I remember that specifically because I'd set my mug of recaf down on the console ledge, and the liquid started trembling, little concentric rings moving outward from the center, like something out of an old Earth film I'd watched as a kid. My grandmother used to call those rings God tapping his finger on the table. I picked up the mug, looked at it, set it back down. The rings were still there. My name is Callum M. Wangerurk. I was 31 years old, a third-tier relay technician assigned to Mirova Station in the Velaris Belt, which is about as unglamorous as it sounds. Mirova wasn't a military post. It wasn't a diplomatic hub. It was a signal relay station, the kind humanity had been building in the outer belts for the better part of 40 years, all boring infrastructure and cooling vent maintenance, and the occasional thrill of receiving transmissions from deep probe vessels nobody paid attention to. We were 6 people on Mirova, 6 people on a rotating 4-month schedule, watching data streams flicker across monitors and relaying them toward the inner system where someone with actual authority could decide if any of it mattered. It wasn't glamorous work, but I liked it. The quiet out here was real quiet, not the forced quiet of a city at 3 a.m., but actual silence, the kind that exists between stars. And in that silence, you notice things. Like deckplate vibrations that don't have a source. I looked around the observation bay. Specialist Taya Orimoto Vance was at the secondary sensor console, her dark hair pulled back tight, her fingers moving over the haptic display with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. She hadn't noticed anything yet, or if she had, she wasn't reacting. Across the room, Senior Tech Harlan Duggan-Bosch was asleep at his auxiliary station. Third shift, deep in the belt, not much to do. Harlan slept whenever the paperwork allowed it, which in practice meant always. He was 62 years old and had been doing relay work longer than I'd been alive, and I'd never once seen him rattled by anything. I was about to ask Taylor if she'd felt it. Then the proximity alert went off. Not the soft chirp that means a survey drone is passing through. Not the double tone that signals a council inspection vessel arriving on schedule. The proximity alert that went off was the one I'd only ever heard in drills. The one that uses a lower, longer tone, almost subsonic, that you feel in your chest before you hear it in your ears. The one that means something very large is very close and we don't know what it is. Harlan woke up immediately. I don't know how a man that deep asleep can go from unconscious to fully alert in under a second, but he did, and his eyes went straight to the sensor board before he'd even fully lifted his head. "What's the mass reading?" he said, not panicked, just focused. Taya was already pulling it. "I'm getting Harlan, this isn't right, this can't be." "What's the mass reading, Orimoto Vance?" She turned. Her face, normally the picture of careful professional composure, had gone a shade paler than I'd ever seen it. "It's reading close to 900,000 metric tons," she said, "and the number's still climbing." The room went quiet except for the soft hum of station systems. 900,000 metric tons. For context, and I know some of you might be hearing this story secondhand, so let me be clear about what that number means. The largest council military vessel in active commission at that time was a heavy cruiser class called the Kethalori, operated by the Von Confederacy. It weighed roughly 120,000 metric tons at full load, and the first time humans had seen one at close range, our diplomatic corps had reportedly sent back transmissions describing it as breathtaking and deeply unsettling in the same sentence. 900,000 metric tons was not a heavy cruiser. 900,000 metric tons, was something else entirely. "Get me a visual," Harlan said. Taya hit the exterior camera array. The main display filled with the familiar Veloris belt backdrop, scattered asteroids, the distant amber glow of the belt's densest region, stars cold and white and unchanging. And then the shadow. It moved across the field slowly, the way a continent might move if you could somehow watch it from above, immense and unhurried, and so large that for a moment my brain simply refused to process it as a single object. I kept looking for edges, kept trying to find where the thing ended and space began, and every time I thought I'd found the boundary, the cameras shifted to track and there was more. More hull, more mass, more ship. "God," Taya said quietly. She said it the way people say it when they're not really calling on anyone, when it's just the only word left. Harlan was already reaching for the emergency transmission console. His hands were steady. I don't think the man had ever had unsteady hands in his life. "I'm going to need both of you focused," he said. "Whatever this is, our job right now is to document and relay. That's it. Document and relay." "What do we document?" I asked. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit my voice cracked on the word document, but it did. Harlan looked at me, and there was something in his expression I couldn't quite place then, though I've thought about it many times since. Not surprise, not fear exactly. It was more like recognition, like a man who'd read about something for years finally seeing it in front of him. "Everything," he said. "We document everything." The ship took 47 minutes to fully clear our sensor range. 47 minutes at the speed it was traveling, which our instruments estimated at roughly 60% of its maximum output, based on energy signature readings that Taya spent the first 20 of those minutes insisting couldn't be correct. They were correct. The vessel was moving at speed, not emergency speed, not full military burn, just traveling, casually, the way you drive to work on a Tuesday morning, not in any particular hurry, not worried about traffic. And in that 47 minutes, our sensor array collected more data than Mirova Station had accumulated in the previous 6 years of operation. Hull composition readings that didn't match any alloy in the Council database, or the human database, or any cross-reference materials catalog we had access to. The computer kept flagging them as unclassified compound probable sensor error, which was the system's way of saying, I don't have a category for this. Power output readings that Harlan eventually stopped trying to calculate in real time, because the numbers were destabilizing the display algorithm. Drive signature, and this one I'll never forget, because it was the one that finally made Taya sit down in her chair and put her hands flat on her knees and just breathe for a second. A drive signature that matched nothing in any propulsion database, council or human, but bore the closest resemblance to a theoretical framework that had been published in obscure academic circles roughly 30 years ago. A human academic paper, published by a Dr. Amara Selasioyalek at the University of Lagos Orbital Campus in 2356. Theoretical framework for sustained multivector graviton folding in large-mass naval vessels. I remember Taya reading that name off the cross-reference result. I remember the way she said it slowly, like she was making sure she had it right. And then I remember the silence that followed, because we all understood what that meant. Or at least we started to. I should explain something about the Galactic Council for people who only know the broad strokes. When first contact happened, real first contact, not the 50 years of careful radio signal diplomacy that preceded it, humanity came to the table with everything we had, which at that point, circa 2301, was genuinely impressive by our own standards. We had interplanetary travel. We had modest FTL capability, short-range, experimental. We had a unified planetary government that had taken 150 years of painful political evolution to build. We had weapons systems, defensive grid networks, an allied fleet of 47 vessels. We were proud of all of it. The council looked at what we'd brought and gave us what I've seen described in various diplomatic histories as a polite and encouraging reception, which is the diplomatic equivalent of patting a child on the head for drawing a picture. Because the council, 15 species organized across 900 colonized systems, some of them 10,000 years deep in spacefaring civilization, had seen small emerging species before. They had a whole classification system for it. Humanity landed in what they called Tier 4, spacefaring but pre-galactic, militarily non-threatening, economically developing, recommended for observer status pending full review. Tier 4. We were Tier 4 for 11 years. In those 11 years, the Council conducted what they called an integration assessment, a thorough survey of human capabilities, culture, infrastructure, and potential. They cataloged everything. They sent assessment teams to every major human installation. They measured, counted, weighed, analyzed, and filed reports. And at the end of 11 years, they issued us a formal integration status, Tier 3, provisional, with specific benchmarks we'd need to reach to advance further. Most species spent 50 to 100 years moving from Tier 4 to Tier 3. We did it in 11, which genuinely impressed certain council members and genuinely worried others. And there was one specific line in the official integration assessment report that I've always found interesting, because of what it says and what it doesn't say. It reads in the official translation, "Human civilization presents a development profile that is, in several respects, anomalous. Their rate of technological advancement is notably rapid. Their social cohesion, while historically volatile, has reached a stability threshold that merits observation. Their military capacity, while not currently posing a strategic concern, suggests a trajectory that warrants continued monitoring. Assessment complete. No undisclosed capability programs detected." No undisclosed capability programs detected. That's the line. That's the line I thought about, standing in the observation bay of Mirova Station, watching a ship the size of a small continent glide through the Veluris belt. No undisclosed capability programs detected. I thought they were looking in the wrong places. Harlan got the emergency relay out within the first 10 minutes of the sighting. Priority encoded, compressed burst transmission, addressed simultaneously to Earth Fleet Command, the human diplomatic mission at Council Station Veluris Prime, and the Outer Belt Monitoring Network. He didn't ask us what he should say. He just wrote it, read it back to himself once, and sent it. It said, Relay Station Mirova, Veluris Belt Grid 79er. Sensor contact, unclassified vessel, mass in excess of 900,000 metric tons, drive signature partial match to Seleucioilec theoretical framework, 2356. Vessel bearing toward inner system. No hostile action observed. No transponder signal, requesting immediate guidance and confirmation. Then he looked up at both of us. "Now we wait," he said. "For how long?" Taya asked. "Until someone tells us something." The response came in 43 minutes, which, for anyone who's worked in relay communications, means someone on the other end sent it immediately upon receipt. There was no deliberation time in that gap, just signal travel. It came from Earth Fleet Command, and it was also priority encoded, and it was very short. Continue monitoring. Do not transmit further on open channels. Secure line incoming within the hour. This is not an anomaly. Repeat, this is not an anomaly. Stand by. This is not an anomaly. I read it 3 times. Taya read it and laughed, but it wasn't a funny laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when the alternative is something less controlled. Harlan read it and nodded, like a man who just had something confirmed. "Harlan," I said, "what do you know?" He was quiet for a moment. In all my time on Mirova, I'd never heard Harlan Duggan-Bosch hesitate before he spoke. He was the kind of man who had an opinion ready for every situation, the kind of senior tech who'd seen enough that nothing really wrong-footed him. He hesitated now. "I know," he said carefully, "that there have been programs, human programs, that weren't part of the official integration assessment. That's been rumored in certain technical communities for years. Most people dismissed it because it seemed impossible to hide anything at that scale. The council is thorough." "Apparently not thorough enough," Taya said. "No," Harlan said, and his voice was quiet. "Apparently not." The secure line came through 51 minutes later. It wasn't a voice call. It was a data package, heavily encrypted, multi-layered, the kind of transmission that takes your station's entire processing capacity to decode in real time. Our small system labored over it for nearly 4 minutes while we stood in silence watching the progress bar crawl. When it opened, it was a text briefing, 23 pages. We read it together, which I think says something about Harlan's character. He could have read it privately, as senior tech, as the one with clearance. But he pulled it up on the main display and stood back so all three of us could see. "I'm going to tell you what was in those 23 pages because eventually, and this took another 4 years, it all became public record anyway. But in that moment, sitting in the observation bay of Mirova Station, reading it for the first time, it felt like the ground had shifted under me. Not metaphorically. It felt physical, like my sense of the world had a center of gravity and someone had quietly moved it while I wasn't looking. The program was called Meridian. It had been running for 26 years. It started in 2361, roughly a decade after first contact, when a small group of human scientists, military strategists, and, this part surprised me, historians, had looked at the Council's integration assessment process and made a decision. They decided that humanity was being evaluated by entities who had never, in 10,000 years of galactic civilization, encountered a species quite like us, and that the assessment tools the Council used, designed for a wide range of emerging civilizations, were calibrated for patterns that humanity didn't fit. The Council was thorough, but thoroughness is only as good as your assumptions. The Council's assumption was that any spacefaring civilization of humanity's scale would develop its military capacity in visible, documentable ways. Orbital platforms, large surface installations, registered shipyards, logistical networks that left traceable energy signatures. Because that's how every species the Council had encountered developed. Not humanity. Meridian's foundational document, reproduced in that 23-page briefing, included one paragraph that I've seen quoted so many times since it became public that it's almost become cliché. But I want to say it anyway, because reading it for the first time, in that station, it hit different. It said, "We are the species that built cathedrals in secret during wars. We are the species that kept fire in caves for 10,000 years before anyone thought to ask who taught us how. We are the species that learned to write by drawing pictures of our dead. We do not develop capability the way other species develop capability. We bury things. We carry things. We remember things in our bodies that our minds have forgotten. The Council will look at what we show them and believe they have seen everything. This has always been our advantage. Let us not squander it." 26 years. Hidden shipyards in the deep asteroid belts, not the catalogued belts, not the registered mining sectors, but the outer reaches, the places that were technically charted but practically never visited. Hidden construction programs operating in near-total communications blackout. Supply chains so carefully routed through legitimate commercial traffic that they left no distinctive pattern. Thousands of people had known, scientists, engineers, military personnel, and not one of them had spoken publicly, not one leak, not one whistleblower, not one Council intelligence asset had turned anything up. The briefing noted, with what I can only describe as dry satisfaction, that approximately 412 Council intelligence agents had been assigned specifically to monitoring potential undisclosed human military programs over the past 2 decades. They had found nothing, because we'd had roughly 6,000 people working on it, and every single one of them had understood something important. We were the new species. We were Tier 3 provisional. We were watched and cataloged and assessed. And if the Council ever decided that humanity was a strategic concern, if that polite, encouraging reception ever curdled into something else, we needed to have something they didn't know about. Not for aggression. For the same reason you keep your hand near your pocket when someone's watching too closely. Just in case. The ship we'd watched cross the Veloris Belt was called the HMWS, Relentless Meridian. HMWS, Human Meridian Warship. It was the first of what the briefing referred to as the Titan class. 7 vessels total had been completed. 3 more were in final construction stages. The Relentless Meridian was the oldest, the first, the one they'd built when the program was still theoretical, and the engineers were still arguing about whether the drive architecture Selassie-Oyelek had theorized was actually achievable or just beautiful math. 941,000 metric tons at full load. Crew of 1,800. Armament that the briefing described in technical language that made my head swim: particle lance batteries, mass driver arrays, a point defense network dense enough that the engineers described it as a second hull made of light, and something called a graviton displacement system that the briefing mentioned only briefly, in a footnote, with the notation, further details beyond the clearance scope of this transmission. I remember staring at that footnote for a long time. The thing they were telling us was already staggering, and they were telling us there were things they still weren't telling us. The reason the Relentless Meridian was now moving through the Veloris Belt, visible to our sensors and presumably to every Council sensor in the region, was explained in the last 5 pages of the briefing. And this is the part of the story that I think about most. The Council had 3 weeks prior held a closed session. The topic: a proposed revision to the integration status framework. Specifically, a proposal by the Von Confederacy, the most militarily powerful Council member, to revise humanity's status from Tier 3, provisional, to what they were calling Tier 3, restricted. Restricted. The briefing summarized what that would have meant: limitations on human FTL travel beyond a defined boundary. Mandatory inspection protocols for all human vessels above a certain mass threshold. A cap on human military shipbuilding, registered human military shipbuilding, set at a level that would effectively limit Earth fleet to a coastal defense force. The proposal had been framed carefully, diplomatically. It was presented as a stability measure, a precautionary framework for a species whose development trajectory, while admirable, was advancing faster than Council integration protocols anticipated. In other words, you're growing too fast. We'd like to put a ceiling on that. The vote had been close, 11-4 in favor of the proposal. And then the human diplomatic mission at Veloris Prime had done something unexpected. They hadn't protested, they hadn't walked out. They hadn't issued a statement of formal objection. They had requested 48 hours before the decision was finalized, which was within their rights under Council procedural rules. A standard request, the kind that any delegation could make. The Council had granted it. And 42 hours later, the HMWS Relentless Meridian had activated its transponder, for the first time in its operational life, and set a course through the Veloris Belt. Not toward Council Station Veloris Prime, not toward any human installation, just through the belt at 60% output, transponder broadcasting clearly, sensors undisguised, its full mass and power signature open to any station with the capability to read it. Just passing through. The way you might stretch your arms above your head in a meeting where someone is telling you what you can and can't do. Casual, unhurried, not a threat. Just a reminder. We have things you didn't know about. I read the last page of the briefing and sat with it for a while. The vote on Tier 3, restricted, had been suspended pending further diplomatic consultation. That was the official language. What it meant, translated out of diplomatic careful speak, was that 11 council members had looked at their sensor readings from the Veloris belt and had a very quiet, very quick conversation about revising their assumptions. Taya was the first one to speak after we finished reading. "How do you keep something like that secret?" she said. "For 26 years. Thousands of people." "The same way we keep anything," Harlan said. He was looking out the observation port at the stars, his reflection faint in the transplace. "We wanted to. That's not, I mean, you need structures, enforcement, something to stop leaks." "We had those too," Harlan said. "But Taya, I'll tell you something I've believed my whole career in this sector." He paused. "When a species has a reason to do something, a real reason, a reason that matters to everyone involved, they don't need enforcement. They remember the reason on their own." Taya thought about that. "And the reason was?" Harlan turned from the window. His face was calm, and in the low blue light of the station, he looked older and younger at the same time somehow, like a man who'd been carrying a weight so long it had become just part of how he stood. "The same reason it's always been," he said. "We're new here, and the universe is old, and we didn't survive this long by assuming goodwill from larger things." We spent the next 16 hours on enhanced monitoring protocol, which in practice meant Taya, and I took turns sleeping 2 hours at a stretch, while Harlan seemed to require no sleep at all, and simply remained at his console like a feature of the station rather than a person. The sensor data we'd collected was relayed in full, encrypted, direct line to 6 different human installations simultaneously. I watched the transmission confirmation codes come back one by one, little green lights on the relay board, and thought about all the people on the other end. Analysts, officers, diplomats, people who had known about Meridian, and people who were learning about it the same way I was, through a briefing that kept its most interesting details in footnotes. On the 14th hour, we received a second communication, not from Earth Fleet Command this time, from the human diplomatic mission at Veloris Prime. It was from Ambassador Yusra Akafarendai. I recognized the name from news transmissions. She'd been humanity's senior diplomatic representative on the station for the past 6 years, a former Navy commander who'd moved into diplomacy and reportedly had a gift for speaking to the council in language they understood. Her message was also short. It said, "Relay Station Mirova, your documentation of the transit was received and has been incorporated into the formal record. The Council has requested a full briefing on human naval capabilities. We will be providing one. I wanted the crew of Mirova to know you were the first human civilians to see her. That matters. Well done." Her. The relentless Meridian was a her. I don't know why that detail caught me. Maybe because we'd been talking about it in terms of mass readings and drive signatures and diplomatic strategy for so many hours that I'd stopped thinking of it as a ship. As a thing that human hands had built, slowly, over years, in the dark and the cold of the deep belt, kept secret by people who believed in the importance of having a secret worth keeping. And now she was out in the open, sailing the Veloris belt with her transponder broadcasting and her mass signature fully lit, and the Council was watching her, and humanity was going to sit across a table and explain everything. Not apologize. Explain. There's a difference. 3 days after the relentless Meridian's transit, the Council requested a formal demonstration. Not of weapons, not of capabilities. Of maneuverability. which, in the language of interspecies military diplomacy, is the most honest request possible. Anyone can build a large thing. What the Council wanted to know was what the large thing could do. The relentless Meridian and two of her sister ships, the HMWS Enduring Promise and the HMWS Daybreak Crossing, conducted a three-ship formation exercise in open space outside the Veloris system, with Council observer vessels present. I didn't see it in person. I was still on Mirova, still relaying data, still running on 2-hour sleep cycles and too much recaf. But I watched the feed. And I want to try to describe what it looked like, because I've seen a lot of feeds of a lot of things in my years of relay work, and nothing before or since has looked quite like this. 3 ships, each close to 1 million metric tons, moving in formation the way small strike fighters moved in training exercises. Not perfectly, nothing that size moves perfectly, but with a precision and responsiveness that made the Council observer vessels, themselves formidable military craft, look briefly like they were standing still. They ran a 6-point navigation pattern, sharp course changes at intervals that the observers' analysts later admitted they'd assumed would be impossible at that mass. They ran a velocity exercise, accelerating to what the briefing had coyly described as significant output, and then decelerating with controlled exactness to a pre-designated endpoint. Then they held position, all 3 of them, in tight formation for 30 seconds. In open space, holding position is easy. In formation, with 3 near-million-ton ships, with the gravitational interplay between them and the mild drift of a contested spatial environment, 30 seconds of exact position keeping is not easy. The relentless Meridian held it for 63 seconds. The Council observer vessel's data was transmitted back to Veloris Prime in real time. Ambassador Akafarendai was reportedly in the room when the analysts finished their preliminary review. She said nothing, just nodded. Because the numbers said what she needed them to say. The formal briefing happened 8 days after the transit. 23 Council member representatives, seated in the circular chamber at Veloris Prime that was used for proceedings of the highest diplomatic category. The chamber held 1,000. They'd kept it at 23, which was itself a message: we're listening, not performing, listening. Ambassador Akafarendai represented humanity alone. Not a team, not a delegation, alone. Which was also a message, though a quieter one. The kind that doesn't announce itself, just settles into the room and waits to be noticed. She spoke for 4 hours. The full transcript is public record now, and I've read it several times, and every time I find something new in it. But there are parts of it I want to share here, because they go to the heart of why this story matters, not just as a tactical history, not just as a diplomatic incident, but as something about what humanity is and how we work. She opened by acknowledging what the Council already knew: that Meridian existed, that it had been running for 26 years, that it had produced 10 Titan-class vessels and a significant secondary fleet that had not been disclosed in any integration assessment. She didn't apologize for this. She said, the Council's integration assessment framework was designed to evaluate emerging civilizations using criteria developed from the observed behavior of species the Council had already encountered. We understand and respect that framework. We also recognize that we did not, in several important ways, fit it. We made a decision not to correct that misperception. We are not here to apologize for that decision. We are here to explain it, because we believe the explanation is relevant to what the Council decides to do next. The explanation she gave was precise and unhurried and completely honest. She explained the Tier 3 restricted proposal. She explained that humanity had received intelligence about the proposal through legitimate diplomatic channels, not through espionage, before the vote. She explained that the existence of Meridian had been known to a small group of senior human leaders for years, and that the decision to make it visible now was a deliberate response to a proposed limitation that humanity believed was unjust. She said, "We did not reveal Meridian as a threat, we revealed it as a fact." The Council proposed to limit human military development based on an assessment of human military capacity that was incomplete. We wished to ensure the Council was working with complete information before reaching a final decision. Then she said something that I've thought about every day since I read it. She said, "I want to be direct about something. Humanity has fought wars, many of them. We have been at various points in our history among the most effective engines of destruction our own world had ever produced. We do not hide from that history, and we do not ask the Council to ignore it. What we ask, what we have always asked, is to be evaluated on what we choose to do with what we are, not on what the Council fears we might become. We did not build Meridian to conquer. We built it because we are a species that knows what it means to be at the mercy of something larger than ourselves, and we decided, very quietly, very carefully, never to be in that position again. That is not aggression. That is memory." The room was quiet for a moment after that. Then the Von Confederacy representative, Counselor Vethalas, whose species had been spacefaring for 9,000 years and had seen more emerging civilizations come and go than humans had recorded centuries, said something in the translated record that I think is maybe the most interesting response anyone could have given. Counselor Vethalas said, "Ambassador, I have been on this council for 41 years. I have sat in this chamber for the integration assessments of 17 species. And I want to tell you that in 41 years, I have never sat across from a species that said that to me. Not in those words, not with that honesty." He paused. "It does not make me feel safer," he said, "but it makes me feel that we were having the wrong conversation, and I would like to have the right one." The Tier 3 restricted proposal was formally withdrawn 14 days later. Humanity's status was revised upward to Tier 2, full member, with an accelerated review timeline that had never before been granted to a species in the Council's recorded history. The HMWS Relentless Meridian, along with her 6 completed sisters and the 3 still in final construction, was formally registered in the Council's naval database under a new designation category that had to be created specifically for them: Strategic Reserve Vessels, Human. The other 9 Meridian Program components, the secondary fleet, the deep belt installations, the research stations, were disclosed in stages over the following 6 months, in a process that Ambassador Akafarendii reportedly managed with the same calm precision she'd brought to the briefing. And through all of it, the Council kept discovering new things. Things they hadn't known to look for. Things that didn't fit the patterns they'd expected. Things that were very specifically, very thoroughly, very intentionally human. I finished my rotation on Mirova Station 4 weeks after the relentless Meridian transit. The supply vessel came on schedule, same as always, docking clang, equalizing pressure, the smell of recycled ship air that's different from station air in ways you can't quite name. My replacement crew came aboard in their bright new EVA suits, looking curious and slightly nervous the way every new rotation always looks, not quite sure what they've signed up for. I showed them the systems, the relay boards, the sensor array, the proximity alert. I made sure they knew the tone, the long, low one, the one you feel before you hear. Just in case. Taya caught the same transport out that I did. We sat together in the small passenger bay, both of us looking back through the porthole at Mirova Station, getting smaller behind us. "You going to write about it?" she asked. "Probably, someday." She nodded, then she said, "It was really something, wasn't it, watching her go past?" "Yeah," I said. And I meant it, though I wasn't sure I could explain exactly what I meant. It wasn't just the size of it, though the size was genuinely something your body understood before your brain caught up. It wasn't just the diplomatic implications, or the 26-year secret, or the ambassador's 4-hour briefing, or the counselor's honest and slightly shaken response. It was something about the fact that 6,000 people had worked on it, and none of them had talked. About the fact that someone in 2361 had looked at humanity's situation, new species, Tier 4, patted on the head, integrated and assessed and cataloged, and had said, "We need to remember who we are when no one's watching." About the fact that we had, in the cold and the dark of the deep asteroid belts, with no fanfare and no witnesses and no diplomatic credit to be earned from it, we had done what humans apparently do when the stakes are high enough and the cause is clear enough. We had gotten to work. We had kept the secret. We had built the thing. And when the moment came, not a moment of war, not a moment of aggression, just a moment where someone proposed to limit what we could be, we had taken the thing out into the light and said, "You didn't know about this. There are other things you don't know about. We'd like to discuss the terms of this relationship." Harlan Dugganbosch stayed on for another rotation at Mirova. He stayed for 3 more after that. Actually, stayed until the station was upgraded to a full monitoring post and staffed with a crew of 30, and had 3 separate secure communication channels and a military liaison officer from Earth Fleet. He sent me a message when the upgrade was complete. It was 3 sentences. "They put a bigger display in the observation bay. You can see further now. I think that's right." I kept that message, still have it. There's one more thing I want to tell you. About 6 months after the relentless Meridian transit, a Council science delegation visited one of the Meridian Deep Belt installation sites. Now disclosed, now officially registered, slowly being open to the kind of cross-species review that full Council membership enables. The delegation was led by a researcher from the Shen Combine, a species of extraordinary scientific reputation, methodical and precise, the kind of civilization that had built things to last and took pride in understanding how everything worked. The lead researcher, a being whose name translates loosely as careful observer of complex systems, and I mean that literally, that's how their naming conventions work, spent 12 hours touring the installation, looked at everything, asked careful, technical questions, reviewed documents, examined the construction methods, the materials, the drive component assembly facility where elements of the relentless Meridian's engine had been built. At the end of the 12 hours, the researcher filed a formal assessment note with the Council Science Committee. The note said, in translation, "I have reviewed the human installation at Veloris Deep Belt Sector 14 in full. The construction methodology is unconventional. The materials science is, in several respects, more advanced than current Council standard, developed independently and without the benefit of Council technical exchange. The scope of the program, maintained in complete secrecy over the assessed timeframe, represents a collective organizational and motivational achievement that I find difficult to place within existing models for species behavior at this developmental stage." I requested a meeting with the facility's chief engineer. He is a human male of approximately 60 years who has worked at this installation for 19 years. He showed me the original construction drawings for the primary drive housing hand-drawn on paper, he said, because they didn't trust digital records at the beginning. I asked him how they kept it secret. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "We believed in it." I am not certain I fully understand what he meant. But I have been conducting scientific assessments for 30 years, and I have learned to take seriously the things I do not fully understand. I recommend extended observation of this species. I suspect they are not finished surprising us. I am Callum M. Wangerurk. I was a relay technician. I was standing at a console in a small station in the Veloris belt when a shadow crossed our sensors, and the deck plates hummed, and my mug of recaf made rings on the ledge, and the thing that crossed our field of view was something we'd built. Something we'd built and hidden and kept and believed in the dark, for 26 years. I didn't build it. I didn't keep the secret. I didn't even know there was a secret to keep. I was just the person who happened to be standing in the right place at the right moment, with the sensors running and the recording equipment on. But I'm human. And what I've come to understand in the years since is that the relentless meridian wasn't really about the ship. It was about the message the ship carried, without a single word of broadcast transmission. The message was simple. It said we were here longer than you knew. We were building longer than you knew. We were thinking longer than you knew. We are not what you assessed us to be. We are what we chose to become. And we're just getting started. The stars don't change. That's the thing about working out in the belt. You look up at them long enough, and you start to understand that they've been there for billions of years and they'll be there for billions more, and everything happening in the space between them. All the species, all the councils, all the assessments and proposals and diplomatic sessions and secret shipyards, is just a brief, bright activity in the middle of a very long silence. But even so, even knowing all that, when I picture that shadow crossing the amber light of the Veluris belt, that 900,000-ton shadow, patient and massive and unhurried, built by human hands in human darkness for human reasons, I feel something I can't quite name. Something that isn't pride exactly, not quite. It's closer to recognition. Like seeing a relative's face in a crowd. Someone you didn't know would be there. Someone who looks back at you and nods once as if to say, "We're still here. We were always here. Don't worry. We remember."